Welcome to Partner Technical Services Product Release Training. The Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 Financial Management New Features Budgeting course will be presented by Senior Support Engineer Ryan Clevin. This course only covers new features, so knowledge of previous versions of Microsoft Dynamics AX is a prerequisite. This course was developed based on beta versions of Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, so there may be some slight differences in the release product. Now let me introduce Ryan Clevin.
Welcome to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 Financials Management New Features. Today we'll cover Module 5, Budgeting. My name is Ryan Clevin. I'm a Senior Support Engineer specializing in AX Financials Management Application Support. Today we'll cover the changes for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Lesson 1, Overview of Budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson introduces the changes for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009, budgeting was an informational-only function. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, we now provide budgeting and budget control solutions for both public and private sector organizations. Budget transactions replace ledger budget tables and are available in workflows that can be used for routing and review. Budget control is a process that monitors the budget and that can provide feedback about the availability of funds during the entry for budget transactions, accounting journals, and source documents such as purchase orders and invoices. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, significant changes have been made to budgeting functionality to enhance budgeting capabilities. Changes to budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 include all of the following, which we'll cover in this course today. A Budget Manager Analyst Role Center. Financial dimensions are available for budgeting and budget control. Budget rate type and budget exchange rates can be specifically assigned for budgeting. You create budget models and budget cycles. You have the availability to use budget control configuration. You can define budget control on certain source documents, accounting journals, and budget transactions in Dynamics AX 2012. You have the ability to enter budget transactions. You can define workflow for budget transactions, budget transfer rules, allocations, and recurrences. There are new budget inquiries and reports, and there's a web services interface for budget transactions. So let's start with Lesson 2, where we'll talk about the setup for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson introduces the setup components involved with the implementation of budget changes for Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. There are a number of setup components involved with the implementation of budget changes for Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. These setup components involve defining the dimensions for budgeting, defining exchange rates for the budget rate type, define budget transaction codes, define budget models, define budget allocation terms, define budget transfer rules, define budget parameters, define a number sequence for budget transactions, configure budget transaction workflow, enter budgets, create recurring budget amounts, allocate a budget amount across dimension values, allocate budget amounts using a period allocation key, create budget transfers using budget transaction list pages, and transferring budget from subledgers. We'll discuss each of these components as we proceed in Lesson 2. And the first setup component that we'll talk about in Lesson 2 is define the dimensions for budgeting. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you have the ability to select the financial dimensions within the chart of accounts that are set up for use in budgeting. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009, you could include financial dimensions in your ledger budget. However, with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you now have the ability to create a budget structure that can include dimension attributes that may or may not be included in an account structure. This allows you the ability to budget at a more granular level than the main account number. To enable dimensions to be used in budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, take the following steps. First thing that you'll notice is that budgeting is actually under its own menu path in Dynamics AX 2012. So I'll start with going to budgeting, setup, dimensions for budgeting to open the budgeting dimensions form. In the budgeting dimensions form, you would click in the available list of dimensions on the chart of accounts dimension, the area of the form. You click on the financial dimensions for which you want to budget against, and click the insert button so that they appear on the left side under the budget dimension area. So you would start by using the budgeting dimensions form to select the financial dimensions that you want to have the ability to budget at. Now that you can see how to define the dimensions for budgeting, let's start Lab 2.1. The second setup component that we'll talk about for the setup of budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is to define exchange rates for the budget rate type. There's a default rate type called budget that is available to assign as the exchange rate type for your budget. However, you can create a new exchange rate type for use with your budget. The budget rate type is provided since the exchange rates for budgeting typically do not change throughout the budget cycle and are not subject to the fluctuations that may be experienced on transactional currency exchange rates. The exchange rates that you define for your budget rate type will be used for conversion if you enter budget transactions in a currency other than the main currency of the company. So to define exchange rates for the budget rate type, we'll go to General Ledger, Setup, Currency, Exchange Rate Types to open the Exchange Rate Types form. In the Exchange Rate Types form, I can see I have an exchange rate type in here that's already called Budget. Click the Exchange Rates button, where you can see that you can enter a from and a to currency. The from currency would typically be your company's functional currency, while the to currency would typically be the currency for which you want to convert the functional currency balances to. You define the quotation unit. This would typically be either a 1 or 100, depending on how you would normally enter your exchange rates. And then in the display valid exchange rates for the date range form, you can enter a from date and a to date, and a corresponding exchange rate that will be assigned to the exchange rate type. At this point, we'll start Lab 2.2. Now that we've defined a budget exchange rate type for use in budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, the third setup component that we'll talk about is the defining budget codes. Budgeting in Dynamics AX 2012 is transaction-based. Because of this, we allow the creation of budget codes that allow for additional auditing of budget transactions that impact budget balances. When you enter a budget transaction in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you assign a budget code to the register entry. A budget code gets assigned to a budget transaction type, which is a system-defined value. The system-defined values for budget transaction types in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 include original budget, transfer, revision, project, fixed assets, supply forecast, and demand forecast. A budget transaction code is required for developing budget amounts, as the budget transaction is required on budget register entry. To define budget transaction codes in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, we'll go to Budgeting, Setup, then Budget Codes to open the Budget Codes form. In the Budget Codes form, you can see the budget types defaulting in, which are system-defined values, so revision, original budget, transfer, fixed assets, encumbrance, project transfer. I can create new budget codes. You can also default in a reason code for the budget codes that you create. When you save the budget code and it is the only budget code for a specific budget type, the Set as Default Code option will be marked. The default flag is primarily used for functions that generate budget registers. And as an example, when transferring project budgets to the operating budget through budget transactions, the budget transaction code marked as default for the transaction type of project will be used when budget registers are created. Start Lab 2.3. The next thing that we'll talk about for the setup of budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is to define budget models. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you need to set up budget models to create a unique identifier of the budget. You have the ability to create as many budget models as needed for use in what-if analysis. The concept of budget models is not new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, but it should be known that if you are using budget control, only budget models that contain submodules can be used for budget control. You can associate a budget model to another budget model using the submodel functionality to view consolidated balances on budget reports. The concept of budget control will be covered in greater detail in Lesson 3. To define budget models in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, we'll go to Budgeting, Setup, and Budget Models to open the Budget Models form. If you wanted to create a new budget module, you simply click the New button from the menu bar. On the General Fast tab, there's a budget model, which is just the name of your budget model, the name of what you want to call the budget model. There's a stopped checkbox. You could mark the stop checkbox if the current budget model has been stopped for any additional changes. And there's a cash flow forecast checkbox. If you mark that, cash flow forecast should also be able to be applied to the current budget model. In the submodel fast tab, you can also map any other budget models as submodels to the budget model. Now that we're familiar with creating budget models in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, let's start Lab 2.4. The next setup component that we'll talk about for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is to define budget allocation terms. Budget allocation terms are new to Dynamics AX 2012. They can be used to define an allocation to dimension values based on a percentage value. The setup of budget allocation terms is an optional step towards the budgeting process. The use of an allocation term provides an automated way of creating the breakdown of budget amounts across dimension values or combinations of dimension values. For example, if specific budgeted amounts for travel are allocated based on a percentage by department, that allocation can be defined using an allocation term, which is later used in budget register entry. This significantly simplifies the creation of budget allocation register transactions. So to define budget allocation terms in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you'll go to Budgeting, Setup, Budget Allocation Terms to open the Budget Allocation Terms form. In the Budget Allocation Terms form, you can click the New button to create a new budget allocation term, enter a budget allocation term, enter a description for the budget allocation term. You'd save the header information, and in the grid area of the budget allocation terms form, you can now enter the financial dimension values for which you want to base your budget allocation term for. It's important that the percentage value for the details of the budget allocation term sums to 100%. Now that we're familiar with the concept of budget allocation terms, let's start Lab 2.5. The next setup component for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is to define budget transfer rules. Transfer rules can be used to determine when budget transfers are allowed between dimension values. For example, budget transfers within a specific department may be allowed without approval, but transfers across departments must be reviewed and approved prior to the balance adjustment. Transfer rules allow you to create such a definition. If a budget register is entered that violates a transfer rule, then the only way for the transfer to be completed is with approval through budget register workflow. Budget transfer rules are new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 as they did not exist in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009. This feature is important in that it allows you to facilitate and put controls around budget transfer. To define budget transfer rules in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you'll go to Budgeting, Setup, and Budget Transfer Rules to open the Budget Transfer Rules form. In the Budget Transfer Rules form, you can click the New button to create a new budget transfer rule, enter a name for the budget transfer rule, enter a description for the budget transfer rule, and you'd select the account structure for which the budget transfer rule applies. This is needed to determine the dimensions that must be available when defining the criteria for the rule. You can then click Add and define the details for the criteria for the budget transfer rule. Please note that you can add multiple criteria to the same rule by selecting the Add action again and providing additional criteria. Overlaps in the criteria within the same rule are prevented. However, you can have overlaps in criteria across rules to allow for the same dimensional value to belong to multiple transfer rules. Now that you're familiar with budget transfer rules, start Lab 2.6. The next setup component involved for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 involves defining budgeting parameters. There is a new series of parameters added specific to the budgeting functionality changes in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. These parameter settings are all available on the Budgeting Parameters form in the Setup area of the Budgeting module. So I'll go to Budgeting, Setup, Budgeting Parameters to open the Budgeting or the Budget Parameters form. In the Budget Parameters form, there's a number of new parameter settings that we'll talk about and how they relate to budgeting functionality in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. The allocation key, this provides a lookup to period allocation keys. This is an existing field from Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009 and is used by cash flow forecasts to determine how a budget transaction line amount will be allocated within the cash flow forecast if your budget models are set to use cash flow forecast. The check revenue budget for zero budget balances. You have the ability to define whether revenue budget balances can go below zero. The options available in this field include none. So when you mark none, revenue budget balances can go below zero. Provide warnings. When you mark this option, the system will provide a warning message if revenue budget balances go below zero. Or prevent budget update. When you mark this option, the system will prevent you from updating a budget if that budget would push a revenue budget balance below zero. Time period for budget balances. This field works in conjunction with the check revenue budget for zero budget balances field. In this field, you are specifying the time period to use upon determining a zero budget balance for revenue budget amounts. The options available in this field include fiscal period. When you mark this option, the system will look at the fiscal period level when determining whether a revenue budget balance would go below zero. Fiscal year. When you mark this option, the system will look at the fiscal year level when determining whether a revenue budget balance would go below zero. Or fiscal year to date. When you mark this option, the system will look at the fiscal year to date level when determining whether a revenue budget balance would go below zero. In the Create Processed Budget Register entries when transferring budget from area, these options are used to determine if a budget that transfers from other areas should be transferred to a budget register that is in a completed state or draft state. If the budget transactions are created in draft, they can be subject to workflow approvals prior to updating the budget balances. Please note, if budget control is enabled, then budgets transferring from other areas must be transferred in draft to allow the budget check to be applied and the budget control system updated with the necessary budget balance information. The budget journal field. This selection is only relevant when commitment accounting is enabled and allows a journal sequence number to be defined. Now that you're familiar with the parameters in the budget parameters form for Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, let's start Lab 2.7. The next setup component that we'll talk about for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is to define a number sequence for budget register entries. As budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is more budget transaction based, there is a new number sequence reference added for budget register entries. You need to assign a number sequence code for budget register entries through using the budgeting parameters form. So I'll go to budgeting setup, budgeting parameters to open the budget parameters form. Notice in the budget parameters form there's a number sequences tab. The reference for budget transactions in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 will be called budget register entries, where you'd assign a number sequence code. If you don't already have a number sequence code, you simply right-click, go back to the main table form, and create a number sequence code and assign it on the number sequences tab of the budget parameters form against the budget register entries reference. The numbering schema that will be used for your budget register entries when you start entering transactions for your budget in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 will follow that of the number sequence code that you have assigned here. Now that you're familiar with how to create a number sequence code for budget register entries in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, let's start Lab 2.8. The next setup component for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is to configure budget register workflow. With Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you now have the ability to set up workflow for budget transactions. When you set up workflow for budget transactions, budget register entries associated with the workflow are automatically routed for review. There are two types of workflow types that have been added for use in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 specific to budgeting: budget register line approval and budget register approval. For additional information about the configuration of workflow for use with budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, see the What's New in Workflow training document. The next thing that we'll talk about in the setup components involved for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the actual entry of budgets. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, a budget register entry consists of a transaction header and transaction lines. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009, the budget data was all stored in the ledger budget table. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, the ledger budget table is replaced by the budget transaction header and budget transaction line tables. The budget transaction header table is going to store the transaction header information from the budget transaction. The budget transaction line table is going to store the transaction detail information from the budget transaction. If you intend to use budget control, you should configure budget control prior to entering budget amounts. Budget control must be configured in order for the budget amounts to be included in the budget control calculation. For additional information around how to configure budget control, we'll talk about budget control in Lesson 3. So to enter a budget register entry that affects budget balances in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, we'll go to Budgeting, Common, Budget Register Entries to open the Budget Register Entries list page. You can click the New Budget Register Entry button to open the Budget Register Entry New Record form. The default date will default in as today's date. The entry number will default in from the number sequence code that you have assigned to the Budget Register Entries reference in the Budgeting Parameters form. In the budget model field, you'll be able to see the budget models that you had previously defined via the budget models form. In the budget code field, you can see the budget codes that you can use to classify what type of budget register entry this is. So if this is an adjustment to the budget, this is the original budget amount, an expense budget transfer. So the budget code field allows you to further classify what type of budget register entry this is. The budget type field will default in as a system-defined value based on the budget type that's assigned to the budget code that you select. There's also a reason code. You can enter or select a reason code for this type of budget register entry. So this is the budget transaction header information via the budget register entry form. So the data that you enter in the budget register entry area of the budget register entry form is essentially populating the budget transaction header table. In the budget account entries area of the budget register entries form, you can select or add the individual lines for the budget register entries. For the budget register entry. The key fields are, you click the Add Lines button, you'll notice that the date will again default in as today's date. You must enter an account structure. So if only one account structure that is in use for the chart of accounts associated with the ledger contains budget-enabled dimensions, the account structure will default. Assigning an account structure to a budget register entry line is required since not all dimensions within an account structure may be enabled, and the same budget-enabled dimension may be in use within multiple account structures for the chart of accounts assigned to the company. You can then enter the dimension values for the budget-enabled dimensions. The order in which the dimensions are entered is based on the order in which the dimensions appear within the account structure. You can then enter a budget amount and the budget amount type. The budget amount type will default to expense but can be changed. The amount type is needed since the main account is not a required element for budgeting. The amount types that you have available to select include expense and revenue. You can then enter the currency for the budget register line. Once done entering the transaction, you simply click the Update Budget Balances button on the menu bar. When you update the budget balances from the budget register entry form, the budget balance for the budget model and dimension combination will be updated based on the amount for the period in which the date falls. These are the steps for the entry of a budget transaction, which we'll call a budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. We will also discuss in greater detail all of the following features which you can use with budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, including the creation of recurring budget amounts, the ability to allocate a budget amount across dimension values, the ability to allocate budget amounts using a period allocation key, the ability to create budget transfers, the ability to use the budget register list page, the ability to transfer budget from subledgers. So let's talk about these features that you can use with budget register entry now that we have a little bit more familiarity with how to enter a budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. The first piece of functionality that we'll talk about that you can use with budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the ability to create recurring budget amounts. So in the budget register entry form, I have a budget transaction header, a budget register header that I've created. I also have budget register lines created for the budget register entry. You'll notice in the budget account entries area, there is a button called Enter Recurrence. I can click the Enter Recurrence button and it'll pop up a Enter Recurrence information where I can create a recurrence pattern for the selected budget account entry. First thing you'll notice is that there's an interval type field. The interval type option will be days, months, or years. And you can then enter an interval value and then an expiration date. For example, if you recorded a budget register entry dated January 1st, 2011 to record $1,000 of rent expense, you can enter months in the interval type field, 1 in the interval field, and an expiration date of 12/31/2011. When you click the Create button, you can see that based on the information that you inputted in the Enter Recurrence Information form, that you'll have the appropriate lines created in the budget account entries area of the form. So once you've used the Enter Recurrence for your budget register entry, again, you can hit the Update Budget Balances button, which is essentially posting the budget register entry. The next thing that we'll talk about that you can use with budget register entries in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the ability to allocate a budget amount across dimension values. So earlier in lesson 2, we discussed the setup of budget allocation terms. Once budget allocation terms have been defined, you can implement them into budget register entries. You can apply the budget allocation term to a budget register line to allocate the amount entered using the budget allocation term. So again, I'm going to go back to our budgeting menu. I'll go to Common and Budget Register Entries, where I'll click the new budget register entry. And I'll just get a budget account entry register line created. Now that I have a line for my budget register entry, you'll notice that there is an Allocate to Dimensions button in the budget account entries area of the budget register entry form. I can click the Allocate to Dimensions area, and I can then select a budget allocation term for the budget account entry. The budget allocation terms that you have available to select are going to be based on the budget allocation terms that you previously defined. After you select the budget allocation term to apply, you click the Allocate button. After you click Allocate, you will see that the original budget transaction line is reversed through a separate budget register entry line, and new lines are created based on the definition of the budget allocation term. The next thing that we'll talk about that can be used for budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the ability to allocate budget amounts using a period allocation key. So I'll go back to the budgeting menu, go to Common Budget Register Entries, and click the new budget register entry. Select a budget model, budget code, enter an amount, so now I have a budget account entry created, which we'll talk about how to use a period allocation key against. Period allocation keys allow you to distribute budget transactions in fiscal periods of a given fiscal year. Period allocation keys are not a new concept in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. However, you now have the ability to directly assign period allocation keys when you enter budget registers. So if I click on the register line that I have entered here, I can click the Allocate Across Periods button, which will give me a list of the period allocation keys that I can apply to the selected budget account entry. If you needed to see how the period allocation key is created, you could simply right-click on the period key and drill back onto it so you can get an idea of what's going to happen when you allocate based on that period allocation key. After you apply the period allocation key, you will see that a reversal is created for the budget register entry line that you entered, along with the new budget register entry lines based on the percent allocation by month that was defined in the period allocation key. The period allocation key can work in combination with the fiscal year definition of the calendar assigned to the ledger. The next thing that we'll talk about that can be used with budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the ability to use budget transfers. So I'll go to Budgeting Common, Budget Register Entries, and click the new budget register entry. I'll just create a new budget register header. And align. And amount. So you can create budget transfers through the budget register entry form by utilizing the budget code that is assigned to the transfer budget type. When you select the Create Transfer Action button from a budget register entry line, the Create Transfer form will open, which will allow you to record a budget transfer while in the midst of budget register entry. The Create Budget Transfer form is also available from within Purchase Requisitions, Purchase Orders, Vendor Invoices, and the accounting journals that can be enabled for budget control. Budget control will be covered in greater detail in Lesson 3. Now that I have a budget register entry line created for my budget register, I'm going to click the Create Transfer button, which will open the Create Budget Transfer form. In the Create Budget Transfer form, the transaction date will populate based on the date that was used in the budget transaction line. The budget model defaults to the budget model that was selected on the budget transaction header. The transaction budget code will default to the budget code defined for the transfer budget type and that was marked for the default code for that type. However, the budget code can be edited. The account structure would default to the account structure in use on the budget register line. You can then enter the dimensional values to which the budget amount will be transferred. Select the currency of the transfer, the amount to transfer to the two dimension values. Within the grid section of the form, you can then determine the dimension values and amounts from which the budget will be transferred. And then you'd click the Update Budget Balances button. If workflow was enabled for the transaction code used on the budget transfer, you will see a message indicating the budget transfer request has been submitted for approval. Note, the overall transaction total must equal 0, indicating that the amount transferring out of the dimension values budget balance is equal to the amount transferring into the selected dimension values. The next thing that we'll talk about that relate to budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the budget register entries list page. So back in Budgeting Common, Budget Register Entry, this is the budget register entries list page, which essentially provides a central view that allows you to see all budget register entries through a single list page. This list page also provides the ability to perform workflow actions against the budget register where workflow is required based on the budget code. You can also select multiple draft budget register entries and update the budget balances for a selection of register entries at one time versus performing that action on each individual register entry transaction. When you select Update Budget Balances, you will have the opportunity to perform the update using batch processing. Now that we've talked about the setup components for budgeting in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 in Lesson 2, Let's talk about budgeting control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 in Lesson 3. This lesson introduces the concept of budget control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Budget control is based on the ledger for a legal entity and can be defined to monitor budgets and provide feedback about the availability of funds. You can define the calculation that determines the budget funds that are available and specify dimensions and dimension values separately from main account for budget control. Depending upon the configuration of budget control, the source documents and accounting journals that exceed budget funds available can be prevented from further processing. There is a significant amount of flexibility in how to enable budget control. When you enable budget control, you have the ability to specify the dimensions and dimension combination values that are subject to a budget check. You can determine the budget funds available calculation, and you can specify which source documents and accounting journals to which the organization wants to apply against a budget check. Once budget control is configured, source documents and accounting journals can be checked for budget funds availability. The integration points that are available for budget control are the source documents and accounting journals where planned or actual expenses are typically recorded, which would include budget register entries, purchase orders, travel requests, expense reports, purchase requisitions, vendor invoices, accounting journals. So let's get into budgeting control. Budget cycles are new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. A budget cycle is a period of time in which the budget is in use. Budget cycles relate to periods within a fiscal calendar and are shared across all legal entities. After you create a budget cycle, it is necessary to map the budget cycle to your budget models. This will determine how budget amounts will be entered for the budget through budget register entry. So to define a budget cycle in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, I'll go to Budgeting, Setup, Budget Cycles to open the Budget Cycle Time Spans form. In the fiscal calendar field, you can select the fiscal year definition of the related fiscal calendar that you have set up. The fiscal calendars that you have available to select originate from the fiscal calendars form. In the length of budget cycle field, you have the following options: map to fiscal year or specify number of periods. When you select map to fiscal year, the starting period and ending period should be assumed from the fiscal calendar that you selected. When you select specify number of periods, you are telling the system what starting period and ending period to utilize. Later, when we configure budget control, a budget cycle will be mapped to a budget model to determine the budget model for which the budget amounts for budget control will be populated. The association of a budget model to a budget cycle is ledger specific, while the budget cycle definition is legal entity dependent. So now that we understand how the budget control is created and gets assigned to the budget model, let's talk about the actual budget control configuration. The budget control configuration allows for both an active version and a draft version, allowing for changes to be made to the configuration while keeping budget control enabled utilizing the active configuration. Upon the initial setup of budget control configuration, an active configuration will not exist. To access the budget control configuration form, we'll go to Budgeting, Setup, Budget Control Configuration. The budget control configuration form has the following fast tabs: define parameters, over budget permissions, budget funds available, select source documents, select accounting journals, assign budget models, define budget control rules, select main accounts, define budget groups, define message levels, and activate budget control. So let's talk about the options and their implications of these options for use in budget control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. On the Define Parameters tab, of the budget control configuration form, you specify information related to the financial dimensions to be used in budget control and other select fields. The account structure field, you're assigning the account structure to be used for budget control. In the budget control dimensions area, you're assigning the dimensions that you want to have implemented for budget control. Only the dimensions that you have enabled in the defined dimensions for budgeting form will be available to select here. In the define default budget control parameters, you can define a budget control interval, which determines how amounts will be aggregated for a budget check. There's a budget cycle time span, where you'd select the default budget cycle time span. There's a budget threshold. You can enter a budget threshold if one should be in place. For example, if you set the default to 95%, this means that when 95% of the budget is consumed, the threshold is met. The threshold can be used to provide warning messages to the end user or to define budget permissions for user groups to prevent specific user groups from exceeding the budget threshold. You could also set up a budget threshold that exceeds 100% to accommodate the scenario where an organization allows for exceeding the budget by a specific percentage. For example, if you want to allow for exceeding budget by 5%, you can set the budget threshold value here to 105. In the display a message when exceeding budget threshold field, you can mark this option to provide a warning message if the budget threshold would be exceeded as a result of the budget register entry. Let's take a look at the over budget permissions. The settings on the over budget permissions tab are used to determine if specific user groups have the ability to exceed budget funds available or are restricted from exceeding budget funds available or budget thresholds. The settings that you define in this form are used as defaults and can be overridden for a budget control rule or budget group. For example, assume that you have 3 user groups in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, budget manager group, a finance group, and an AP group. If you only wanted to allow users in the budget manager group the ability to allow over budget processing, you would add the budget manager group to the over budget permissions tab and then select the allow over budgeting process option. Users in the finance and AP groups are then prevented from processing source documents or accounting journals that exceed the budget threshold. By default, if a user is not within a user group, the default setting of prevent over budget processing is applied. As a result, it is not necessary to add all user groups for which you do not want to grant users the ability to exceed the budget threshold. On the budget funds available tab, we allow you to define the budget funds available calculation that will be used for budgeting control. The default calculation for budget funds available is original budget plus budget transfers minus actual expenditures plus unposted actual expenditures plus budget reservations for encumbrances plus budget reservations for unconfirmed encumbrances plus budget reservations for pre-encumbrance plus budget reservations for unconfirmed pre-encumbrances. The amounts to some options available on the Budget Funds Available tab of the Budget Control Configuration form are driven off of the budget types that are assigned to the budget codes that are going to be used during budget register entry. These include original budget, budget revisions, draft budget revisions, budget transfers, draft budget transfers in, draft budget transfers out, actual expenditures, unposted actual expenditures, budget reservations for encumbrances, budget reservations for unconfirmed encumbrances, reduction to budget reservations for unconfirmed encumbrances, budget reservations for pre-encumbrances, budget reservations for unconfirmed pre-encumbrances. So again, on the Budget Funds Available tab of Budget Control Configuration, you're telling Dynamics AX 2012 what logic, what calculation it should use to determine where you are against your budget. Let's take a look at the Select Source Documents tab. On the Select Source Documents tab of the Budget Control Configuration form, you would select the source documents that are subject to budget control. For example, if you have selected to include budget reservations or encumbrances in the budget funds available calculation, you may want to enable purchase orders for the budget check, since when the amounts and accounts are checked for budget on a purchase line, the budget control category assigned to the reservation is encumbrance. You can also determine if the budget check should occur as lines are entered or saved, which is essentially the enable options underneath each source document on the tab. The source documents that you can enable for budget control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 include purchase requisitions, purchase orders, vendor invoices, travel requisitions, and expense reports. Let's take a look at the Select Accounting Journals tab. The settings that you defined on the Select Accounting Journals tab of the Budget Control Configuration form are similar to what you define on the Select Source Documents tab. On the Select Accounting Journals tab, you select the accounting journals that will be subject to budget control. You can also determine if the budget check should occur as lines are entered and saved through marking the four related enable options, or if you just want it to be checked at the header level. The accounting journals that you can enable for budget control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 include daily journals, allocation journals, project expense journals, and fixed asset journals. Let's take a look at the Assigned Budget Models tab. On the Assigned Budget Models tab of the Budget Control Configuration form, you need to create an association between the budget cycle and the budget model for use in budget control. So all you're doing is you're mapping a budget model that you created from the Budget Models form, and you're assigning a budget cycle against that budget model for use in budget control. Let's take a look at the defined budget control rules. Budget control rules are required for budget control configuration and determine the combinations of dimension values for the dimensions that have been selected for budget control that are subject to a budget check. For example, assume that you have assigned the department and cost center dimensions as budget control dimensions. Through defining budget control rules, you can define specific combinations of departments and cost centers that are subject to a budget check. Even if all combinations should be enabled for a budget check, you must define a budget control rule. The rules are used to validate against a ledger account during source document entry. The dimensions within the ledger account are matched against a budget control rule. A budget check will take place. An organization can also define a budget cycle time span, budget interval, budget threshold, and budget manager for the budget control rule if needed. Page 42 in the Define Budget Control Rules area of Lesson 3, Budget Control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 provides a couple of different examples of how you could use budget control rules. Let's talk about the Select Main Accounts tab in Budget Control Configuration. When Main Account is not selected as a budget control dimension on the Define Parameters tab, it is necessary to select the main accounts in which the budget control rules should be applied. If main account is included as a budget control dimension, then the main account would be included in the budget control rules, and this setup step would not be necessary. Only main accounts that have been assigned an account type of total, profit and loss, and expense are available for selection, since these are the accounts used in recording actual expenditures for which budget control is designed. Let's talk about the Define Budget Groups tab. Budget groups can be defined to define a budget pool or collection of dimension values whose budget will be pooled for a secondary budget check. Budget will always be checked against the dimension combinations found in the budget control rule. That dimension combination is also found in a budget group. A secondary check will be performed at the budget group level. For example, assume that you have created a budget control rule that covered all combinations of departments and cost centers. This would mean that if Department 10 and Cost Center 101 were used on an accounting journal or source document, a budget check would be applied. In the Defined Budget Groups form, you could create a budget group for Department 10 with all cost centers to assume all amounts across all centers for Department 10 and perform a second budget check against that aggregated budget. Let's talk about the Defined Message Levels tab. User groups can be selected to suppress all budget control warning messages. Users of the user groups marked on this tab will continue to receive error messages based on over budget permissions, but they will not receive warning messages. Let's talk about the Activate Budget Control tab in Budget Control Configuration. On the Activate Budget Control tab, you would activate the budget control configuration that was previously in draft mode. To activate the budget control configuration so that the draft will become active, click Activate. To turn on budget control so that the active budget control configuration takes effect, click Turn On. When you see that you are viewing the active budget control configuration message in the menu bar, this means that the budget control configuration has been activated and is already turned on. Now that we've talked about budget control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, let's take some time to start Lab 3.1. Now that you're familiar with budget control in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 as discussed in Lesson 3, let's talk about Lesson 4, New Budget Reports in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson introduces the availability of new budget reports and inquiries in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. With the budgeting changes in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, there are new reports that have been added. These new reports provide the ability to view, analyze, track, and audit available budget amounts, actual versus budget expenditures, budget transactions, and budget control statistics. The new reports added in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 specific to budgeting include the Budget Funds Available report, the Actual versus Budget report and inquiry, the Budget Detail report, and the Budget Control Statistics inquiry. The first report is the Budget Funds Available report. The Budget Funds Available report allows you to view each portion of the Budget Funds Available calculation, calculated as it relates to the financial dimensions that you use in budget control. So to print the Budget Funds Available report, I'll go to Budgeting, Reports, Budget Funds Available to open the Budget Funds Available form. In the Budget Funds Available report form, you can select the financial dimension set. You'd select the financial dimension set that aligns with the financial dimensions that you are using in budget control. In the Budget Cycle Time Span field, select the appropriate budget cycle time span. In the Dates to Include area of the form, select a budget cycle or enter a date range by entering a from date and a to date in the date range area. In the Balance Type area, select to show net change or show accumulated. In the Budget Model field, use the Select button to select the appropriate budget model. In the Destinations, Current Print Destination area of the Budget Funds Available report, select the appropriate printer, and then click OK. So again, the Budget Funds Available report allows you to see these allocated balances based on the budget funds available calculation that you've defined. The second new report or inquiry that we'll talk about that is new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the Actual versus Budget report and inquiry. This allows you to easily view actual versus budgeted amounts for the dimension combinations that you use in budgeting. So I'm going to click on Budgeting, Reports, and then click Actual versus Budget to open the Actual versus Budget report form. In the Actual versus Budget form, select the financial dimension set. You want to select the financial dimension set that aligns with the financial dimensions that you are using in budget control. Select the appropriate budget model in the Budget Model field. Select the appropriate posting layer for which you want to run the report for. In the From and To Dates fields, enter the appropriate date range. In the View By area of the form, select to Show by Net Change or Show by Accumulated. You can also enter a certain restriction on a budget register entry or a budget register entry status or a budget account entry date. In the current print destination, select your printer information and then click OK to print the actual versus budget report. Again, a new report in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. The third report that we'll talk about that is new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the Budget Details Report. The Budget Detail Report allows you to easily view the budget transaction detail for the dimension combinations that you use in budgeting. So go to Reports, Budget Details to open the Budget Details form. Again, you'd want to select the financial dimension set that aligns with the financial dimensions that you are using in budget control. You could mark the Include Draft Transactions and Include Submodels options if necessary. When you mark the Include Draft Transaction option, any budget register that you have entered in the budget register form will be displayed regardless of if these transactions have actually updated the budget balance. When you mark the Include Submodels option, if the budget model that you select has submodels, submodel budget information data will also be displayed. You'd enter the appropriate from and to date fields. You can also enter a restriction in the budget register entries area based on entry number, budget model, or budget type. In the current print destination area, select the appropriate printer information and then click OK. So again, the Budget Detail Report, new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. And the fourth new inquiry or report that we'll talk about that is new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 is the Budget Control Statistics Inquiry. The Budget Control Statistics Inquiry allows you to easily view the individual fields used for the budget funds available calculation for a given dimension combination used in a budget model. So I'll go to Budgeting, Inquiries, and Budget Control Statistics to open the Budget Control Statistics form. The Budget Control Statistics form, I can select the budget model in the Budget Cycle field. And I can also select the appropriate dimensional values that I want to see. So the Budget Control Statistics Inquiry gives you a view of a given budget cycle, budget model combination that allows you to see the budget funds available calculation based on a given fiscal period or budget cycle. So again, the Budget Control Statistics Inquiry, the fourth such inquiry or report that is new to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Now that we've covered Lesson 4 that went through the new inquiries and reports in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, let's move on to Lesson 5, which is the upgrade from ledger budgets in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009 to budget transactions in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson introduces the upgrade path from the use of ledger budgets in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009 to the use of budget transactions through budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, the ledger budget is replaced by budget register entries or budget transactions. As a result, the existing ledger budget tables will be removed in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson describes how ledger budget records from Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009 will be updated to budget transactions after the upgrade. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, the upgrade procedures for budgeting involve pre-upgrade scripts and post-upgrade scripts. In Lesson 5 of the Budgeting Financials Management New Features module, there is a pre-upgrade scripts section which covers the details about how existing budget transaction data will be added to the pre-upgrade scripts during the budgeting or during the upgrade. And Lesson 5 also has some detailed information in the post-upgrade scripts area of Lesson 5 that talks about the scripts needed to create the new budget transaction data. It walks through the tables, menu items, and forms and reports in the AOT and how they will be affected during the post-upgrade scripts. So for additional information related to the upgrade from ledger budgets in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009 to budget transactions through budget register entry in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, review the pre-upgrade scripts and post-upgrade scripts sections of Lesson 5 in the Module 5 Budgeting course of Financials Management New Features. Lesson 6, Budgeting Recap. This lesson provides a recap of the budgeting changes in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009, budgeting was primarily informational. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, now provides enhanced budgeting and budgeting control solutions for both public and private sector organizations. Budget transactions have replaced ledger budget tables and are available in workflows that can be used for the routing and review of budget transactions. Budget transactions, called register entries, are now used to formulate budgets and provide an audit trail of budget-related activities. Budget register entries can be categorized by transaction types, such as revisions, transfers, and original budget, so that you can quickly understand and filter on how a budget changed. Existing Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009 ledger budget records will be converted to budget transactions in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Budget control is a process that monitors the budget and then can provide feedback about the availability of funds during the entry for budget transactions, accounting journals, and source documents such as purchase orders and invoices. While budgeting and budget control are important to any organization that wants to control spending, it is of particular interest to public sector organizations. Budget control is based on the ledger for a legal entity and can be defined by the user to monitor budgets and provide feedback about the availability of funds. You have the ability to define the calculation that determines the budget funds that are available and specify dimensions and dimension values separately from the main account for budget control.
Partner Technical Services is a benefit provided to members in the Microsoft Partner Network to ensure success throughout the business cycle. Partner Technical Services include services offerings with packaged and custom solutions that can help increase revenue, accelerate the sales cycle, win more deals, beat competitors, expand a skill set, provide more reliable deployments, and increase customer satisfaction. Partner Technical Services technical consultants have the latest product, technical sales, and delivery expertise and are committed to partner enablement via knowledge transfer. Through delivery of effective guidance, our consultants share best practices, empowering partners to continually deliver high-quality engagements to customers. When you enroll, re-enroll, or qualify for an upgrade, you will receive partner advisory hours allocated to your organization based on membership competency level. Until you enroll or re-enroll under the new structure, your existing benefit structure will continue. Partner advisory hours provide a single currency to use in obtaining Partner Technical Services packaged and custom solutions. Your current allocation of advisory hours can be used to take advantage of the new offerings under Partner Technical Services. You will only see a change to your advisory hour benefits when you enroll or re-enroll after October 2010. Optimize your business by gaining knowledge and increasing your capacity to successfully provide services to customers. Our offerings help your organization broaden your readiness and enhance your methodologies to further your reach in the marketplace. Accelerate the sales cycle, increase wins against the competition, and expand your business with Partner Technical Services. With service offerings from PTS, you'll be able to proficiently convey the functionalities, value propositions, and key benefits of Microsoft products and solutions. Our best practices and guidance will help grow your market share. Ensure IT services are deployed effectively and successfully with a more reliable result. Sharing our best practices, PTS empowers you to perform operative deployments with minimal risk. If you have additional questions and wish to utilize your partner advisory hours for assistance, contact AskPTS@Microsoft.com or call 1-800-MPN-SOLVE.